Hello, everybody. Very nice. It is very nice to have you with us, especially since our two guests from Unite, some are among our Vanina's and mine favorite filmmakers in the whole world, and this is always very hard to deal with, especially when they are together. So I just hope we will not be very stupid because we really admire you. We just want to settle this from the beginning. We admire you very much, and this is why we
Thank
want to be
you.
at some level tonight. So thank you very much for being with us. Ross, Claire Simon was our guest, I think, 1 year ago, 1 year and some days ago, when we screened a couple of your films. Some were on the Cine Club, Recreation, and Coûte que Coûte, and also Mimi a little later. It was screened without you being here, but there was a retrospective of your work during the French Film Festival. So spectators from Romania were able to watch some of your very good films in cinema or on a big screen. And in the festival, we screened Le Village, which is a 10 episode series about a very special festival. And I'm not just saying just out of the film, because Vanina, being a good lover of documentary filmmaking, she brought me to Lusas, and I really think it was the greatest place, together with Bologna, with Cinema Ritrovato, the greatest festival I've ever been to. So your film is about not only about the festival in Lusas, but also about the team and the projects that they managed to build there, and also about the relation of the of these artists and promoters of art and independent art. Uh, they, with the village, with the villagers, with the local people, and how they integrate there. And I don't know. I hope we will manage to speak a little bit about this film also during this meeting. It's for me. It was when I watched this film. I was not in a good period of my life. I was thinking of not continuing doing festivals and stuff, because it's hard to grow, an audience and everything. And watching your film, it was for me personally, it was very important. So thank you. But it was important from other matters also. But yeah, so very happy to have you with us, and hopefully you will be able to be physically with us in August, also as a
Yeah.
member of a jury. So we can't wait to meet you personally again. And Ross McElwee is the first time that we meet. You were supposed to be one of our, let's say, also a very special guest, because we dedicate a retrospective to your films during the festival. I think it's the first time that the retrospective of your work happens in Romania, if I'm correct. Uh,
Yes.
and unfortunately, you will not be able to be with us in August. But uh, uh, the the first moment when it will be possible to travel safely, we are waiting for you here and do things together. And it's very important, the fact uh, you both of you are teachers also, and with long careers in teaching. And I just want to say briefly that in Romania, this is something very new to teach documentary filmmaking. It's pretty new. I think it's Anna, who is just exiting the shot, is and Paul. They are part of the first generation of graduates of the master degree in documentary. So it's something very important to be able to have this kind of meetings and discussions with filmmakers like you. And hopefully we will be able in the future to also bring you to teach here for a while, if you will have this pleasure. But beside that, I just want to briefly say that I don't want to introduce you, I don't know, with very brief sentences which describe your attitude towards filmmaking, or not attitude, your approach to filmmaking, because I think that during the discussion, it will be more complex, the way that, let's hope, your approach will come out to the audience. So thank you again for being with us, and I want to pass the mic to Vanina for the moment.
Oh, okay. I'm muted. I'm muted. Yes. Hello, Ross. Hello, Claire. Again. Yes. When André almost 2 years ago told me that he was going to be how do you say, the director of the festival, and that he would like me to come and join with him. It's my first. I'm a filmmaker too, and it's my first experience of selecting films and thinking of retrospective and everything. The first thing I told him was Ross McElwee. Sorry, Claire. Huh? It was Claire also, but the first was Ross McElwee. And so it was great, because after 2 years we could finally organize something with you. Okay, you are not coming, but you will come one day. So, and I have personally discovered your work in a festival, a small festival organized by Peripherie in Montreuil, and it was Catherine Bizerne in 2005, I think, if I remember well. And it was 2 days, and really I had no clue who was Ross McElwee. And I went there because I trust Catherine, and so I went there. And I saw a film, and then I was hooked, and I went to see all the films, and that you made until then. And it's really one of the really great experience of festival that I have lived. And you were there, so it was also very good to hear you talking about your films, but to see the films one after the other, maybe also like a series, like, you know, to eat a lot of them, not being so frustrated waiting for the next film. And so, yeah, it's a good thing, a very important thing for me to having you. And Claire also, Claire, when what was it, when I was in the way to do my first film. I did my first film, who's called Stella, without school, without anything. I had seen 10 films, 10 good films of cinema, and one of these 10 films was Coûte que coûte. This was so when I was filming my first film, doing what I could, and I jumped in my films because I was assisting a very bad filmmaker who was doing something that was not okay, and I was seeing what had to be done. I mean, what I felt that had to be done, and so I said, I can't do worse than him. So I bought a camera and I did something, and I said, I can just do shit maybe, but I try. And and then I was thinking of your film all the time. It really gave me strength when I was desperate, because it was in a shanty town. It was very hard, in a very mannish place, very hard life place. I was thinking of you, because also the film that you made in Coûte que coûte, it's quite hard situation, different, but so you are yeah, people who have comment on dit en anglais, yeah, important in my way of filmmaker and of human being. Yeah, so thank you.
And to explain a little bit, the reason why we invited you together for the discussion, it's also a little personal, because when Claire Simon was in Bucharest for the little retrospective, we discussed about you, Ross McElwee, or she brought it up that you know each other and admire each other, etc. So yeah, we realized that it's possible to have you both at some time together with us.
Yes.
So this is the personal connection with this, and this is why we would like
And
to
that's
start.
yeah. And that, yes, and that's it. The next question I had, it was okay.
Question.
I have this. Okay, I have this connection, and I wanted to know, how did you started your connection? You know, who saw the film of who first? For instance, I don't know.
I discovered Ross's films in Lussas.
That's right.
In the very small village, and it was in the schoolroom. It was a classroom from the school. And I remember, Ross, you were there, and it was time indefinite, and I was amazed. I couldn't believe it existed, and we were like 10 people or 15 people, and you were there. And then I remember very well what she said about in Montreuil, when you came as my friend. I'm very friend with Catherine Bizerne, so I met you at that time, or maybe I had met you before. But then in different situations, we got to meet each other, and but I remember very well the first time. It was really in Lussas. It was incredible, and I thought that it was incredible to see this film. I thought it was so strong, and and also I thought that the festival was so strong because I could discover you.
Well, for me, it's a huge circle because Lussas was where I first met you. I don't think we really talked that much, but I was so delighted that you were making a film about Lussas and the life of the festival and the life of the village. And I think it is a big circle. And I think Lussas is a unique festival. We don't have anything like that in the United States. I don't think there really is another one in Europe. And I'm just amazed and so happy that it's continued to thrive. And it, you know, judging from your film, I haven't been back since I went to Lussas that first time, but it seems as if it's still being very successful. They're building new buildings, and but you know, one of the things I enjoyed about seeing the village, Le Village, was that it caught me up. I got a sort of history of what had happened since I had been there, in addition to everything else that's wonderful about the film. But, so yes, and I think Claire and I, we've had a lot of contact over the years. You've come 2 times to Harvard, where I teach, to show your films, and I went to once to La Femis to show a film, and we keep running into each other at festivals. I think in Milan. We were in Milan together. So it's, I'm sure many of you by now know that there's a kind of life on the festival circuit where it's like nomads traveling from one oasis to another oasis, and where you can get food and drink and then go back out into the desert again and try to survive. And that's where I kept meeting Claire year after year, decade after decade. So it's a relationship that I cherish because I think actually we do share a lot of the same values as filmmakers. I think our films are very different, but there's something in the spirit of how you make films that connects to how I make films. I think the films themselves are very different, but there's a connection.
Yeah.
And we could talk more about that later. But.
Yes, there are, I mean, for me as a spectator, there are many connections between your films that are not, not on the surface necessarily, because of course, in your films, Ross, of course, they are very much dealing with your life and with your, how do you say, evolution in life and your thoughts directly expressed on the camera, etc. While Claire Simon, I think most of the times you are present, when you are present, only through your voice, discussing with some of the characters, or through your camera movement. And of course, you are present there, but it's not directly about your yourself, the films. But at the same time, I was wondering about the process of making your films, because about the, how do you say, the starters for certain kinds of topics or for certain kinds of films. Because, for example, in your case, Ross, I don't know, for some of the films, like for example, Bright Leaves, which has this very important topic related, suspense topic related to the discovering the identity of your grandfather, and related to a film from the 50s and with tobacco industry. So I was thinking that maybe this might be a starting point, probably. But some other films, like for example, Time Indefinite that Claire was mentioning, which is more, I don't know, it's more auto-oriented, self-oriented, excuse me, than other films. It's not so obvious. And in Claire's case, in general, like for example, it's the same in some of the films. It's quite, I don't know, probable a certain kind of starting point. Like in Lussas, probably the admiration for in Le Village, the admiration for Lussas. I don't know, but in other films like Recreation, Coûte que coûte, it's also so. It's not so obvious. So this is something that I would like to start with to ask both of you. How do you develop the projects? Do you develop them from from certain topics that you want to, since the beginning you want to address, or you work on, I don't know, on more projects at the same time, and at a particular time something constructs and you start to go further? Is it too general, the question?
Claire, do you want to go first?
I think we had an experience just before we were online, is when Ross said he remembered exactly what he did when he learned that Ceausescu was killed. And it was a bit like it was a part of one of your films, just what you said. It's you were telling us a very important political historical moment, and you had exactly the memory of what you were doing at that time. And because I've been thinking about how because there are documentary filmmakers who are always linked very closely to political events or historical events. And I feel that for my work, it is always it has a political background, but it's everyday life, and it's more like the stories that the characters are telling themselves, in what story they are in. And I'm more interested in to understand what is the story of the people that I'm filming, and what, I think Ross has this very great thing to bring himself as a real fiction character, a real that you are the hero that we follow, but not in a stupid way. It's really, we follow what you believe as a hero of a novel, really. And
protagonist might be a better word.
What?
Protagonist might be a better word.
Yes, but it has a novel style.
I don't think there's very much that's heroic about my life. It's too mundane. It's too normal. But actually, I had a teacher of mine named Ed Pincus, and he described being fascinated by the heroism of everyday life. And that's, I think, a phrase that stayed with me for a long time. So in that way, yes, I guess you could use the word hero if you insist.
I insist. But I think that I am very much interested in how people that I film can be novel heroes. really. And and of course, it probably talks about me, but I'm not. I'm escaping from myself.
Mhm.
And so to say how the process is, I don't know what to say about the process of preparing a film. It's always, I think, very shortly, I would say, each time I would think, this is a film. Okay? Like the one that I've just shot, or I always think like the woods, like Vincennes, I think Vincennes, it's a film. And then it begins. And this is it. It's suddenly I see it as a film, a whole thing, and it's then it's a lot of hard work. But it's the fact that you think something really global, a piece of work. I don't know.
Universal.
And like in the village, I thought this village is incredible because it's very modern and it's with farmers, and it's and when I knew that they were doing a TV in Lussas, or an internet TV, or something for documentary, and I thought it was going to be very virtual, very digital and everything. And then they were building a huge building for documentary, which is the only place in the world where it exists. So I thought that the idea was, of course, the village, but my idea was from the virtual to the building, to the concrete. And that was my line.
Mhm.
And I wanted to get to the end of the building as an answer to the economic stress permanent, that when you have a building built, it's a small answer to the very precarious capitalism stress all the time. And so I thought that someone, Vanina, you quote Coûte que coûte. Coûte que coûte was really about a small company that was trying to survive and to get rich, and collapsed. But there was no building. And I felt that in the village, the fact that they were building this huge thing for documentary, maybe it will not last for documentary, but at least it's there. And and I felt that during the series, it was filming the fight against death, against disappearance of, and in a village, it's very strong to feel that everyone is growing from childhood to the end of their lives, and everyone is sure that the village will stay. It will be more or less immortal. And so the idea was more this fight towards immortality in this small farming village.
That happens with me sometimes too, that I see or latch onto one concept of some kind, like the building in Lussas for you, the building, the film headquarters. For me, for example, in Bright Leaves, the tobacco film, maybe I shouldn't talk too much at length about it because I don't think everybody's seen it, but basically it's a film about my family's connection to North Carolina. North Carolina is in the American South and grows more tobacco than any other state in America. And for a long time, I'd wanted to make a film about tobacco, but it was such a huge topic. It was very controversial. And I didn't have any idea how to do it. And so I made other films. And then one day, a relative, a cousin of mine said I needed to contact another cousin because he had a picture that he wanted me to see. And the picture turned out to be a motion picture, a movie. And my cousin collected films, old films. He was a film collector. And he had a film called Bright Leaf, which starred Gary Cooper, who was a major American actor in 1950. And it was the story of a tobacco baron. And supposedly, my cousin said, this film is based upon the life of our great-grandfather. And I said immediately, aha, that's the way I can find a door to open to this huge topic of tobacco, addiction, mortality, family, your homeland, all of these things I was interested in. But it took that one specific thing for me to be able to decide to undertake that film. And of course, I filmed him showing me the film, the movie, and my cousin talking about it, but I still had no idea what would come next. But once you start with an idea that's strong, a single scene, other scenes get connected to it. It's amazing. You start to figure things out and you go along your way. So I never worked from any kind of a preordained plan of any kind. I don't do research in advance of places where I shoot. I don't pre-interview. I've always just relied on one thing leading to the next, kind of concatenation process, and it works. In the Berlin Wall film, maybe that's a better example because I think more people have seen it. Back in the 1980s, when I was a great deal younger, it was a major news item in the life of everybody who was growing up at that time, both in Europe and the United States, because the Cold War centered in some ways upon Berlin and East Germany and West Germany. And I went to the Berlin Film Festival to show a film. I've been invited to show a film there. And I actually kind of forgot that the Berlin Wall was there. The festival is so big and so exciting and there's so much going on. And then after 5 days, I realized, oh, the Berlin Wall is here. We should go see it. We drove to it. It was in the snowy urban landscape of Berlin. And of course, the wall itself was painted with graffiti and was quite colorful against the white background of the snow, of the urban snow that had just fallen in Berlin. And it was almost that particular view from the viewing stand of the wall that I had. It was just 1 second. It's again, unlike Claire's having first heard that they were building a center in Lusace, a tiny village. They were building a big film center. I suddenly thought, this thing is amazing, the Berlin Wall. And what is it like for people who have to live next to this thing all the time? Not tourists, but people who live there. And from then on, I was able to make the film. I knew also, because I don't speak German, that I should probably find a particular locus, a place on the Berlin Wall. And that was Checkpoint Charlie. And I felt I kind of gave myself permission to go ahead and film there, despite the fact I wasn't connected to the German culture in any way, because there was an American, actually an Allied, they called it at the time, an Allied outpost at Checkpoint Charlie, mainly manned by American soldiers and mainly visited by American tourists. And I thought, okay, that's my entree into beginning that film. I felt I had permission, almost cultural permission, to go there and to try to begin making a film. After that, I had no idea what would happen next, but we kept encountering moment after moment. And I think we're lucky enough to find enough to build a film on. So it took those are examples of 2 moments. They were very precise in a way, but led me to make a kind of much larger, broader film than the moments might have indicated.
Yes, but continuing on what you just said, you also use a very well constructed voiceover, and your presence is very much constructed in all the films, like in in a continuous way from a movie to another, which create of course it's you, so it's people might say yes, it's obvious that it's the same, but the reflections and I don't know, not only the personal details, but also your reflections, which are very surprising. Many times you make a lot of connections between some images, some glimpses of images that you encounter. They look very much that you think a lot, for example, about them. For example, because I specifically admire Ed Pincus, and you named him as being your teacher. Yes, I only saw one of his films, which was called Diaries, and
Yes.
it was more related to direct cinema in a way, because it was not so much, it was it had this feeling of capturing the moment without much interfering afterwards, for example, which is, of course, it's not true because he edited, etc. But in your case, what I want to say, they look that you think a lot about the construction. Does this happen afterwards at the editing? It's like when you would you would watch I don't know, film diaries, in a way that you shot, and then you start playing with this. I'm talking about the voiceover, especially the reflection, or you many times you base what you are, I don't know, searching to find also on this construction.
Well, I do write to the material. I don't write a scene first and then film things that illustrate the scene. It's the other way around for me. And I think I don't have a specific process. I don't have rules for writing narration. I curse myself sometimes when I'm in the process because I think it's so stupid to add this responsibility to making a film, which is hard enough already, which is why Claire is so smart about her filmmaking. She doesn't have to do narration because she's not part of what's happening on screen. Very smart, Claire. But for better or worse, that's how I make films. And so I think, it's hard. I can't really answer the question of how I process, how I go through the process of creating a character. I just try things again and again. The writing is very difficult for me. I mean, it's simple writing. If you look at a text, it's not at all complex syntactically. I don't use a lot of big words. I just write very simply. But it takes me so many times, so many drafts to get it to work right. Often what you write on the page or on a keyboard seems great, and then you record it and you put it in with the picture and it doesn't work. So there's a lot of that process going on too. It's very hard to be objective because it's your own life to some degree. And for me anyway, it's extremely difficult to be objective about that delicate balance of letting yourself into a film, but not being too solipsistic or self-absorbed to the point where a viewer is not interested anymore. It's a huge challenge. The thing I want to say about Claire's films, sometimes I've thought about Claire's work in comparison to Fred Wiseman, who's another filmmaker that I respect quite a bit. But I think Claire's films are very different from Fred's because you have a real rapport with people you are filming, even if they're not your friends and not your family. You don't know them before. And of course, we don't see what happens in the moments when you meet them and you talk to them about what you're doing before you start filming. But I think your personality or something about you as a presence enables you to get people to open up in a way. And I'm thinking of les bois qui sont le fait, où les faits,
Le
la
bois dont les
version
rêves
faite.
sont faits.
Yes, thank you. There, which I love. I think it's an incredible film, and that's a film, that I brought you to America. Well, you were in America already, but I brought you to show to my colleagues and my students because I thought it was so remarkable. That film is in some ways like a Fred Wiseman film. If you wanted to make a film about the Bois de Vincennes, you would make that film, and maybe you would find the same communities, but it would be detached. He would be, kind of far away from his subjects. And you wouldn't have a sense of him as the filmmaker at all. And I think with Claire, there's, for me anyway, a strong sense of who this person is behind the camera. And there's a kind of warmth to the way the subjects respond to you that then enable the viewer to enter that little door that you've opened up and not feel like they're being voyeuristic or that they're intruding upon the very personal lives of some of the people you filmed in the Bois. There were prostitutes and there were drug addicts and there were people who were quite different really than people we generally run into. And yet you felt a tremendous compassion for them and sympathy and a sense of humor. You have a great sense of humor. So all of those things make you, I think, very special and have a strong sense of you as a filmmaker, even though you as a filmmaker are not a character in your own films. And so
But in that film, I am more a character because I talk with people, because I think that Wiseman, he would have done in the woods more a film about, because if you are only in direct cinema, it's very difficult in such a large place. Well, he's done a film about the park in New York, but it's more about how it is organized and some people around. But then it's true that I couldn't see the way in the woods to get where I wanted to, which was people doing themselves good and going there because they think it's good, because they think it's good to be in the nature. They think that it's good to have sex. It's good to cycle, to run, so this idea, because going back to the idea of the character, I thought that what was very important is usually you show people in documentary who are suffering a lot, and it's good. I mean, it's important, and but you never show how people, what they do for their own good, in what they believe. And I thought it was very strong because it meant that the people were creators, that they were creating their own life, their own beliefs, that they were obeying their own beliefs in the nature in the fake nature, the artificial nature of the woods. And so I couldn't do that by just observing the people who were working in the woods, because it was just the contrary for them. It was a part of the film, a funny part, because they were like people who were making up a reality as if it was nature, and it was not nature. It was completely constructed. But in order to share something of the experience of the people going to the woods, I had to talk to them, and it was very different, and it was maybe. I did that also in the North Station, in the railway station, but to get the relationship with the people you meet is a way to get to their sense of narration, to the way that they built up a story in which they live. And I thought that this is something that I'm really interested in, is the story that everyone is building and how they live in this story. I really like that very much. I'm very interested in that.
Well, it's what you do so well in Lussas, I think. Le Village of the films that you just finished. And it would have been easy to have made a kind of sardonic view of the French, I think what the American press calls them, or the French something elite, the techno bureaucratic elite coming to this little village and trying to establish their virtues. And yet you're very sympathetic to both sides, I think. And yet there is a way in which I read your ironic take on the juxtaposition of the villagers and the technocrats who've come down from Paris to colonize the South. And there are many very funny moments in the film. And yet it's a kind of cruel humor. I think it's a, you're not cynical about it. And yet you can see the irony of many of the juxtapositions. And that's also very difficult to do as a filmmaker. So I very much appreciated that about the film. And of course, I'm not French, so it could be that the French read the film in quite a different way. I haven't really read articles that have been written about your film and its release in France. Maybe there were some people who were troubled by it in some ways that I wasn't. But I thought, and especially too, and I remember I mentioned this to you the first time you showed me the film, that I kept thinking about Le Vêt Jaune, the sort of yellow vest movement, was really at the peak when you were filming in Lussas. And all the while I was watching your film, I wondered if it was going to filter in somewhere. And then at the very end, I think there is this group of local people who come in and look, and some of them are actually wearing their yellow vest, but they're quite happy to be there. And I think your film has a remarkable way of bringing people together, at least this film did, in a really terrific way that also has a strong political component. And I think there's a critique in this film of capitalism and the capitalistic culture, and maybe the techno-capitalist culture too. But it's all very, very complicated. And I felt like, what is his name? Jean-Marie Barbe? Yes, look, he's a very complicated character, but in the end, he's very, very amiable, at least to me. And I'm sort of really drawn to him. He creates a very sympathetic presence in the film, and he could have easily been a kind of clown, someone to ridicule. But he's like a Quixote character, and he's so idealistic, and his energy carries his colleagues along with him, except for that one woman who rebelled and quit, which was a wonderful moment in the scene in the film. But it's a complex film, and I think your willingness to film all sides of it, and yet remember to also film the people who live in the village, the wine merchants, the grape growers, the woman who sells the fish out of the truck. These little moments where you see La France profonde is still there and part of life, even though it's under siege. And they also talk, I remember now, I'm remembering more, the more I talk. I haven't looked at it since I saw it a year ago, whenever it was you sent it to me. But I remember that there were storms that were very destructive to the farmers, and for people working in technology, dissemination of documentary film and so forth. Weather is not an issue. They can do their work whether or not there's storms, and yet you devoted some time to the effect of the bad weather on the people who were trying to grow crops in that same area around the village. So it's very complicated. I mean, I can keep going on and on about the complexities of this film and what I liked about it. And I hope it was well received in France. I really don't know what happened after you finished it. I assume it was. And I hope that the people in Romania who've been able to see it as part of this festival appreciate the complexity of it and the care. And how long did you film? You were there for a long time, months.
Yeah, 3 years. I began in 2015 and I finished in the end of 2018.
2 years.
Mm. 3.
3.
Yes. But yeah, because I had, this is the very big difference between what I try to do and Weisman is that he is filming 2 months, whatever happens. Right. So there is no time. It's a sort of essential portrait of one place, but the time is not building a script, it's not building a story. And even though sometimes there is a story in one part, but it's very radical. I am more interested in stories, it's true.
Right. You know, and we're talking about Fred Weisman, Claire and I, are as if there's something to be repudiated about his filmmaking. And in fact, I know you, Claire, has a tremendous respect for Fred, and I do too. And his film is foundational to so many American filmmakers, and I think probably filmmakers around the world. So, but it's just to say that Claire has found a way of taking what was useful from that approach in direct cinema and then making it her own. And I think I've done the same thing. I've taken some of what I learned from people like Fred Weisman and Richard Leacock, the early pioneers of direct cinema, and have adjusted it so that it fit my filmmaking personality. And for me, that meant writing a kind of subjective voiceover narration to go with the objectively gathered footage that I was getting.
Because also you make the director point of view very important, but not important in a bad way. It's only seen by someone who has a life in that country or place, or even when you come in Brittany in your last film, it's always it gives us another distance. It's your life distance and your questions, and also you have this tremendous thing that you can use different. How do you say? You have the past and the present, and you always work like this. And this is also one of the things about stories, is that stories come from the past always, and it's obvious in your films how it is so strong, the story of the past, and how it comes in the present all the time. And it's beautiful, I think. It's really wonderful, yeah. This is why I think that you are a novelist.
Nina, this is turning into a two-way dialogue between Claire and me.
Yes, I know, but it was so interesting.
Take some questions from people or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. When Claire and I get together, especially if we have a glass of wine, we start talking and talking. Go on for hours.
You know that it's how we were hoping it will be, because it's, from your dialogue, a lot of more precise aspects come out. I don't know, at least and new for some of us. I don't know. maybe you discussed this already very much, but it's very interesting.
No, okay, I have a question.
Okay.
But I was thinking maybe I don't ask it now because it's so interesting what you say. But okay, maybe I'm going to destroy a moment, but I try my question. No, I was thinking. Okay, so you are both in different ways. You really take your way of doing film, whatever it is to be there. You have a first idea, okay, and then you go, and then one thing leads to another, okay, and I know that Ross, but I don't know for Claire how long it takes. That it can take a long time to arrive to the film, obviously, because there is what you have lived when you have filmed, and then you come back to the editing room, and then it can last years. For instance, just for something to do with the wall, you have filmed something, and 3 years later that you didn't edit. Finally, maybe you tried to edit, but you didn't finish, and then luckily the wall opened, and then it was the film. So how do you manage in your journeys towards your film, you know? I'm talking about editing also, and maybe also production, because you know, we are a lot of filmmakers who take the time that is needed for the film, and if it's not finished when it was supposed to, you take more time. But how do you manage to do all this also financially, both of you?
Well, with the Berlin Wall film, I guess you could say just wait long enough and some catastrophic earth-shaking thing will happen that will give you a conclusion for your film. But I think
yeah, no.
not the wisest approach to take, because sometimes it can be a decade or longer or never. I don't quite know how to answer that question. I think when you have enough material to make the film that you hoped you could make, I think you just kind of know it. For me, it's not because, I mean, the Berlin Wall was an unusual example, but it's not because of some cataclysmic or earth-shaking event that gives you a conclusion to your film.
No.
I don't know, Claire, do you have a way of answering that question succinctly? I can't do it.
Sorry.
But I don't know. What was your question exactly? I was
I don't know.
so much for
okay. No. Okay, let's speak about.
No, but I don't take that much time. It takes me, well, a lot of time to work on editing. It's always, I've been editing a lot, my films, with an editor or only by myself. It depends. Some films like Mimi or 800 Kilometers, I edited them just myself. And it seems that it takes a very long time for me to to get the red thread of the film in the editing, in the cutting room. I begin quickly. I feel I can edit, no problem, and everything. And then and it's not it takes some time to have the thread that goes from the beginning to the end. and it's a film, and it's not anymore what I've filmed. It's a film, and in documentary, it's really something very special that I feel, and I feel that I have to go always more in. And I remember some films. At the beginning, I was always cutting the film after it was finished. You know, it was finished, the sound mix is done, and then I cut it again. And fiction, documentary, it was always like that. And now I try to know that it's not finished, and I have to keep on doing it until really it's. I've been filming. In a sort of disorder with one line all the time, but then I try things and everything. And so to get it back to what is the film story, really, how it is, all the moments, and it's a long work, yeah, very long work.
So you take this time, yeah.
Well,
Now you know that. Yeah.
Well, I have to.
Yeah. I know. Yeah.
I have to.
Yeah.
It's but very often the documentary films I've made them before having any money. Sometimes I did it with I couldn't. It depends, but I think the time of editing is very important. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think it takes me forever to finish films, and it seems the older I get, the longer it takes me, which should be the other way around. But no.
But like photographic memory, did you take a very long time to edit
No,
it?
that was a commission film. I had a deadline, and I finished that in 1 year. So,
it's a beautiful film. I love it.
Thank you.
It's really, and also the way that from one step to another you get to different stories, but you are on your line. It's very strong, I think.
Well, that was unusual, and it's the way most people make films, is you get a commission and you get the money to make it in advance, but you also have a deadline.
And 6 o'clock news was the same? 6 o'clock news?
Yes, it was, but I spread the deadline out a little bit. I had more control. You know, the French Arte producers are very, very strict and demand that you deliver on time. So I couldn't be a bad boy with the French producers. But no, I mean, all my other films have taken 3, 4, 5 years. It's also because I'm teaching too, so that consumes a time, and I have a family, that consumes time. So it's a matter of juggling and keeping all of those balls up in the air.
Maybe it's good also sometimes, because then you stop for a while and you come back to your what you have left, and you see it differently. So it has worked in you.
Yeah, I think it's true.
Yeah,
I think it's very important. Yeah, and I felt it with The Village, particularly because it's so long, and so each time I would go to another part of the story, I could see it very differently because it had so much time between in the editing. Yes, it's very important. Yeah.
Claire, do you show your films to your colleagues and your friends several times before you finish them, or do you just decide you finish them and you know when they're finished?
No, I show them. I show the films. Yeah,
I do too.
and I use what they. It's something that I've discovered with the students. In fact, now I am doing this workshop in the French University in Paris, and I do the first editing of the. I watched the first editing, and I realized that what is very useful for the students that we didn't do in La Fémis, and I think it's a shame. It's I tell them what I think all along the film, what I perceive, what I think of the story, if it's a fiction, what I think of the story, what I think of the actor, but mainly of the story, what I understand and what I feel. And that's how I use the screenings with my friends or people that I ask to come and see. Sometimes I don't share at all their point of view, but I'm very interested to know what they perceive and what they understand mainly. And so it helps me. Sometimes if I go too fast in that part, they don't perceive what's going on. And so I realize from what they say that I have to change and to make it clearer, this part of this part. So it's, yeah, I show it quite a lot. But I think it comes from my daughter, in fact. I remember in different films, she used to come when we lived in the same city, but now you live in the same city as my daughter. But she would say exactly what she thought at that point. She said, at that time, I think this guy is going to do that, this guy is doing this. And she was telling her perception all the time. And it was so useful, so good, you know. To have just this, and I think it's very important for students when they do the editing of their film to have someone. And I usually what I do is I see the film once, I write about it now because we have, but usually we do it together, and then I re-see the film and I do again saying what I perceive and when. I think this is confusing, this I don't know, I don't understand, and or things like that. And in fact, it's not judgment, it's useful. It's very useful for the students to have this idea that I think that at that moment I see this because of that. And so they understand that if it's not what they wanted me to perceive, it's quite useful to have this feedback.
Yeah, I just want to say that together with us, I see some students, some filmmakers who, from time to time, they shake their head, seeming to participate with us. But I want to invite you to also participate with your voice and your thoughts, if you feel like, because I'm sure there are some things that probably you want to address to Clara and Ross. So please feel free to do it when you.
By the way, I have a question to Ross. I don't know, you edit your film or you have an editor? Sometimes you have editors and sometimes you don't have?
Yes. I edited my own films for many years. The first 7 films I edited myself. Then I had a co-editor for the next 2 films. And then photographic memory, I just hired a professional editor. She was great. So it's been a combination. I'm just running out of time. You know, it used to be when I was young, I had lots of time. It didn't matter how quickly I finished a film. But I need an editor now. So.
I also have a question, but I don't want to monopolize. So, Mona, Bogil, if you want to address something, please do it, because we monopolize this otherwise. There is nothing you want to say for the moment?
I have a question.
We have a question here.
Please.
Somebody here has a question. I can't see your name. You were the journalist or the writer who wanted to interview me at some point.
Yes, may I question the Ross?
No. Yes.
The decision to make personal movies, personal films, to put a camera in your family almost constantly. Now looking back, how do you think affect your years? Or and plus, I want to ask you, in which moment you decide to show them the representation of them in your film in order to approve the way you see them and to show for us in public?
Yes, it's a very good question. And it's becoming increasingly more difficult to solve that particular problem. My children loved being filmed, and they loved seeing my movies when they were young. And so, and my wife was totally supportive of my filming, and I also appeared in her films. So there was a reciprocal arrangement there. But as people get older, they become more self-conscious, I find, which is not surprising, but it's true. And it's become more and more difficult to film freely within my own family, to be honest. And I think other things are happened. I don't particularly need to go into them or want to go into them. But family has now become something that's very, very hard for me to deal with in my filmmaking. And it's almost as if my next film, whatever that's going to be, has to be about losing a family in a way. So I don't know that I can say much more about it at this point because it's very much in process, but you've asked a very, very central question to the whole endeavor of autobiographical filmmaking. And it's a real question. And when you're young, everybody's carefree and they love being filmed, and everything flows rather effortlessly. And then as you get older, it becomes more and more problematical. Claire, I know you've had one situation with your daughter, and I know you've talked a little bit about the difficulty of having filmed her when she was a teenager, but you actually managed to get a really wonderful movie out of it. But I think it was probably a strain on your relationship. And you're fine now. Your relationship with your daughter is wonderful. In fact, you have a granddaughter now. But I think, maybe you have something to add about filming family and why you've decided not to, pretty much.
Well, it's, I was very, yes, it was, I did a film about my father also, but it's a short film. But filming my daughter was I was very interested, and it was a sort of impossible story because it was a love story. It was her, she said when she was 15, I was commissioned to do a film about teenagers. And I was watching her friends and everything, trying to find someone to film. And she said, okay, I've met the man of my life. So I thought it was a story. and so the very big challenge was for me to be able, as a mother, not to be a mother, but to be a filmmaker. Even though I still was the mother, but I wanted in filmmaking not to be a mother. I wanted to film that moment, like some people film birthdays or, as you know, Ross, weddings and all these things. And this was more 15 years old. She found the man of her life, and it's the son of the baker of my village. And so I wanted to really, it's not exactly the same way to autobiography. It was really to film what was this moment. Usually you film very protocolar, how do you say that, very symbolic moments. And this was a symbolic moment, but I wanted to film it, and she wanted to, and the boy was very keen on being filmed. But it's true that 15 years after, she's now a famous philosopher, and it's not easy for her. Now it's changed, but at one time, her teacher, because I was very proud of their commitment of the two lovers, her and her boyfriend. So I put their name on the titles, and now I said I've made a film before the village or during the village with teenagers. It's called Young Solitude, and I said to the students, I will not put your family name, your last name, because I want to protect you, because I don't want people to be able to put your name on internet and have this film when you are 35 and you don't want people to see you when you were 16 or whatever. You have to be the master of that. So, and at that time, I didn't know at all this idea of you type the name and suddenly, and so it was difficult for her during her studies that her teachers, they would type her name on internet and suddenly they see a film of a 15-year-old girl, very funny, very clever and everything, but she didn't have that feedback because it was also her commitment towards my childhood and my place in south of France where I grew up, and the people and the way she was really taking a lot of interest and a lot of commitment towards those people and the village. And what was really interesting for me cinematographically, it was to tell a love story without a kiss, without it was to be able to tell a love story and to not to see what a mother shouldn't see, you see, and it was to see to explain the love story with the what is all around and not in the center. And I thought it was a very deep challenge to do that story that way, to allow the viewer to imagine the rest, but we couldn't see, because it was documentary, we could only see the consequences of that love and what they would, it was a bit like, I felt it was like very arrogantly like Romeo and Juliet, the fact that they had to make the village and the Parisian life of my daughter, they had to meet, and they wanted that to meet and to be okay, and it was beautiful. I really admired sincerely, very strongly, their love, the fact that they wanted those two worlds to meet. And I thought it was beautiful, really, sincerely. But it was not a mother point of view. It was my filmmaker point of view.
Yes, but every shot of that film that has your daughter shows a mother's love, in my estimation, of this young woman. It's really so beautifully shot. And of course, it helps that you're in a beautiful location, Clavier, which has wonderful light, the light of Provence, and the way that you film her is just so beautiful and so patient and so loving. So you are a mother, despite the fact that you insist on being a mother.
Yeah, but I mean, I couldn't be a mother in terms of you shouldn't do this, you should do that, and all this. It's it's like, in fact, it's like my film about the playground in the school playtime. I couldn't be a teacher. I couldn't say to the children, you shouldn't do this. And I told them, I'm not a mistress. I'm not a teacher. I'm just an adult that was an old child. And you see, so I didn't want that role of being the person to say the police. I didn't want to be the police. But you are not the police ever when you film the people of your family and everything. You escape completely this filming your of course your father, your family, but also your son. You're never in that role of educating. I mean, you're listening, filming, but you're not in position. This is a very strong thing about this question of educating. And you introduced me to this filmmaker, Steve James, and he made a film called Stevie, where he is inside the film. And he is, I don't know if you've seen that film, Stevie. It's very interesting. Steve James. Steve James.
Steve James, yes, yes,
Yeah,
I know. Yes. He's a very good filmmaker.
Yeah, and I met him in Chicago and in Amsterdam, and he made a film called Stevie, where
yes, I know that film.
where he is in the film, and
Yeah.
he has another position as a filmmaker position. He is educating this guy who is going out of prison and going probably back in prison, and it's very, very risky, very interesting, the position he has. Voilà. About
But Anna's question is really a good one, because autobiographical filmmaking seems like such a wonderful thing to do until suddenly someone close to you doesn't want to be part of your autobiography anymore. And then the trouble begins for you career-wise. You have to sort of remake yourself or solve the problem in a different way. Most people are pretty young filmmakers, just scanning the faces I can see. So you probably don't have children, you don't have a family. And my advice would be, if you think you want to try autobiographical filmmaking, now is the time.
But did you have, I have to continue your question, did you have any kind of regrets about Sherman's March?
No, Sherman's March was, no, I mean, that was a pleasure. I mean, it was hard work, very hard filming work, production work. It was not easy, but it was a pleasure to make that film. And everybody was, and this was again a long time ago, the mid-1980s. Everybody was so relaxed and so good humored. And part of that is because I was filming in the South of the United States, where I think generally people are more relaxed. And also people are very good storytellers. They tell stories about themselves and their lives in a way that's very entertaining. No, that film was a pleasure to make. And the people who were in it were very good humored about the, this was a film, for those of you who haven't seen Sherman's March, it was a film that actually at the time it was released was a kind of very successful documentary, maybe one of the best, most successful documentaries, at least in terms of number of people who went and saw it, that had ever been made in America. And since, you know, it's, and other films have done much better, like Michael Moore's films came along shortly after that. But, and nobody knew when I was shooting the film, that it would be seen widely. I certainly didn't know. And I think we were all kind of shocked and surprised that it got so much attention. And I guess there's some people in the film who could have objected to their personal lives suddenly becoming kind of public events. And again, this is before the reality television era, before social media, the internet, Twitter, Facebook, and all. And so the notion of private lives being shared with the public audience was still something very new. But to answer your question, people in the film seem to have really liked it and enjoyed it. And I think the reason is, and this is akin to what we were talking about, Claire and I were talking about Claire's approach to people, in that you gain their trust and you're good-natured about it. And then the portrait that you show of them is actually very positive for the most part. That includes showing what's difficult about their lives, but still the overall complexity of their lives is shown in a honest way, but an affectionate way, and therefore it's accepted. Now, there are a few scenes in Sherman's March where clearly I was very sardonic. I think the survivalist in this camp in North Carolina, excuse me, they don't come off so well, but that's okay with me. I mean, I did not like those guys, and they were the kind of worst of America. So I was happy to let their lives be perceived that way. I wasn't bothered by that.
And your sister?
My sister was both embarrassed and thrilled. I don't know if you can do both things at the same time. But again, I don't want to spend too much time talking about a film that maybe not everybody's seen. I know you've seen you've seen Something to Do with the Wall, and you've seen Le Village. So we should probably keep most of the conversation on those two, unless, Andres, you think that's not necessary.
No, it's not necessary.
No.
I think you didn't enter so much details. I was just wondering if Anna, who asked the question, if I understood correctly, you were also implying if Ross and Claire are showing the films to the characters, and if they change something
yes,
related to the reactions, no? Does
well,
this
I can answer that very quickly. I do make every attempt to show a version of my film that's very close to finished to the people who are most important to it. Not every single person. Sometimes I have 100 people in my films. I can't show them down. If they have a serious problem with something in the film, then I adjust it. But so far, I've never been sued, for instance, and I've never had any real problem with the way that people are portrayed in the film. But I do show before I release, just to be sure. And also I want them to be able to tell me something's not working or not accurate about the scene in which they've been filmed.
And in your case, Claire, does it happen or never? This kind of adjustments, or?
I'm not as a good person as Ross. I show it to be. I'm sure of what I decide to show, and but I always I always say in touchy situations, like for example in the concours, the film, the competition about the entrance exam in La Femis, I have signed to everyone. Every candidate could say yes and no afterwards, and all the juries had the right to come and see in the cutting room their part. And we did that when we were nearly finished. We invited all the juries to come and see their part. And but I know, I mean, I shouldn't say that publicly, that people don't have the right opinion about themselves. So they don't see themselves as other people see them. So, of course, with my daughter, she didn't want me, and I didn't do what she wanted. because in the end you can hear that she's crying, and I didn't take it out of the film. But now she likes the film. Even though she doesn't like everyone to talk about it because she's now a public person, but she likes the film, so I feel good. And I think the film is done, as Ross has said, with a lot of love, so it's okay. But I don't think that people have a good perception of what they. I love the people I film, so I feel okay with God that I don't believe in, but I feel I trust myself, and so I only do. But I remember I did a short film for Arte. Once I did an evening for Arte, and I wanted to film a gun shop. In France, it's not like United States. You can't buy a gun easily or a weapon, and so I had a very nice assistant at the time, and he said, we should go to the head of the syndicate of the gun shops. And we did that. We filmed with the head of the, how do you say, the head of the corporation of the gun sellers. And I filmed in that gun shop, which was in a very wealthy place in Paris. And I said to the guy, you have the right to take everything out of my editing. You will come and I will not show the film until you've seen it. And he was absolutely happy with the film. And because my technique was very simple. I only filmed the sellers, and I only filmed the hands of the customers, and it was criminal because you could see the desire so strongly with just the hands, and what how to say the sellers of the place would say was very strong, and so he was perfectly okay, and he thought that I didn't cheat at all, which is true, I didn't cheat, but even though the thing that he didn't want people to think was going to happen, people will think that criminals come. I mean, if you want to kill someone, you go to a gun shop and you try to find anything that could kill someone, and it was completely straight with his point of view. It was so. I think that when you show people that are that you have filmed, and you have filmed them with honesty and integrity. It's not that you've cheated and tried to trap them and everything. But if you film a guy who is selling guns all day long, I mean, this will show in the end, you know. And you can do it the most honestly. I did it really with and then I was very honest with this guy, and I realized that he was a sort of temple keeper, you know. He was keeping all the guns, you know, and he was only saying to some people, you can't see them. You have to have a permit to see this very dangerous gun and everything. And I thought it was very interesting. I mean, the honest way is the best way, because you get to the deep end of what people are doing. That's what I believe. I believe that it's much better to be honest with the people you film, because you get the worst and the better, but you get the worst also. You see, because you're honest, and they are honest too. And so you have what they are doing, what they feel, it comes out.
If some of the others have,
I hope this is not public. Huh?
it is what? It's not public? No, it's just between us. Okay, so I also.
Do you agree with me, Ross? Do you agree with me?
Yes, I do. And I think, you know, there was another way I could have answered Sherman's March question about was there any negative response by the people in the film? And I think no, because they saw exactly what you said is like an honest, complex portrait of who I am, or at least at that particular moment. And so because of its, the fact that it wasn't set up, it wasn't directed, that it was an honest representation, they were fine. You know, some of them were a little bit embarrassed, but I think with a smile on their face about it. My sister, for instance, I think was
I also want to ask you something. For example, Claire made documentaries. She made fiction films. There are, I don't know, many differences between at least between the tones of the films that she made, if not in other ways. But in your case, Ross, if I'm not completely mistaken, and I managed to watch all of your films, there is a very big continuity from a point. I think Charlene was the first, autobiographical film that you made, yeah?
Charlene was the first film.
So from Charlene until Photographic Memory, there is a certain, how can I say? There is a continuity in a certain very clear direction, autobiographical, etc. And in the way you construct them, even though they are very different in terms of topics and in terms of, so in a way, it functions a lot for me as a spectator, for example, like it would function with an author, filmmaker, for which I know I am expecting a certain kind of emotions, I don't know, of tone, etc. And it is surprising, but it also delivers in a way this a little bit from what I'm expecting. And I wanted to ask you if at certain points you thought about doing fiction or doing, I don't know, completely different types of films, or it was something that I don't know, it was completely clear until now that you only want to do this autobiographical series.
Well, are you asking me if I have ever been tempted to do another kind of film?
Yes. Yeah. If I don't know, because from what you described earlier, it seems that during time you had some thoughts about, second thoughts, let's say, about this type of filmmaking or approach. And from this perspective more, I am asking this.
Yes. Well, that's the question Anna was asking, I think, about difficulties that increase as you get older and you continue to film things that are very close to you. So sure, I've had second thoughts. I look at my filmmaker friends and colleagues who keep finding interesting films to make in the world, which are not autobiographical. And in some ways, I'm very envious of that. And I know I can do it. I've done a few films that are like that. And yet I feel, sometimes I wonder if I'm not trapped at this point because people are expecting an autobiographical film guided by the same persona. He's changing, his life is changing, but it's the same person, same director. And if it isn't a bit of a trap, but I think I've accepted it in my old age that this is what I do, and I'll have to find a way to do the next one in that same way. And that's not to completely denigrate the whole endeavor. Certainly there are wonderful things about the continuity, and I think it will be an interesting kind of experiment for people to look at, after I'm gone, for what it's worth, if people are interested, that here's this 40-year journey that this guy went on, and what is it about? How does he change? How does the world change? There's something in all of that, I think. And so I will continue to do these kinds of films. But it's really important to me that a film open up to the world, even if it's autobiographical. And that's the only excuse I could give myself to continue to make these kinds of movies. Or yes, there's some autobiographical touchstone moments, but also if the film didn't at certain points stop being about the filmmaker and open up to the world, that wouldn't be interesting to watch. I don't think my life per se is that interesting. I think it's a fairly normal life. But it's only as a kind of lens or a filter by looking at the rest of the world around me that I think it becomes maybe more interesting, more enhanced, because there's a person, an author behind, an auteur behind, if I can use that pretentious French word to describe the endeavor. But I think it really is connected to that.
And Claire, for you, this exploration of fictional and very different kinds of tones, does it have to do with, I don't know, with like, for example, the fiction films that you made, with the typicality of certain topics that you wanted to approach, and it was more it was better to do in this way, or not necessarily? It's related to other things.
Claire, maybe you should talk about Gare du Nord, because you did a fiction version.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you also did a documentary version.
Yeah, she did more fiction films. Yeah.
Well, I think they are all very much, all the films are very much linked, but I am rebel. I don't want to construct a path, even though the path is obvious. But the idea is more about places, from places as an alternative to stories about a character or a story. This is all the way like this, but I will probably change that. But since I've begun making films, they're all about places. The stories are always made by places. All fictions and documentaries, they're always, and this is my idea, was to say, the stories are always very strong, and they take place. In French, we say that, they take place. So I am interested in the place to see where is the story. And so for me, there is a complete continuity between, I don't know, the first film I did about fiction about this woman who is stealing a baby, and the God's offices and Le Bois. It's always the first film is about Nice, about a city. I made 3 features, in 2 documentary and fiction, in the same city, Nice, which is a sort of city of artificiality. And I am very, I think that it's, for me, it's, my interest is really how stories, you can tell them in another way than the traditional fiction way, which I found even in very interesting filmmakers, but now modern actual filmmakers, I feel that there is another way to tell stories, and maybe it was what I've done since now is always trying to see how a place makes a story.
Thank you.
So I can do documentary or fiction, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But like when I went to Gare du Nord at the beginning, I decided I will make a film about this railway station. And I thought, I have no story. I will go inside the Gare du Nord and I will find the stories in the station, and then I will make a story that will be made with all the stories that I found in the station, and it will make one, because it was, but at the beginning I had this feeling of an enormous monster that was the station, and that it was going round like this, and that people will try to stay, but everyone will fall all the time. And that was my first feeling about the station, and the film tells that in the end, I think. But it's always this idea that maybe if we had enough about characters, about the psychology of a person, that would be the only, which is not at all the case in Ross's film, because I feel that there is no psychology in the bad sense in his films, but on the contrary, that we see in Ross's films the strength of a story all the time, but a very powerful strength. And I am trying to get a story out of a place. This is what I tried for since now. But maybe I will change. Maybe I will make a film that goes in a lot of places. But it's not on the desk right now. I have other things on the desk.
Okay. Okay, so Vanina, we don't hear you.
What do you have on your desk?
What do I have on what?
No, but for example, the last thing on the desk.
On the desk, what do you have on the desk?
I have different things, but just I finished shooting a portrait of my childhood village from a garage, from the point of view of, from what's going on in a garage with only men.
You have been filming this during the lockdown?
Yes, not all the lockdown. I did a script for fiction and this.
Good.
You were also asking Ross about this, Vanina?
Yes. What do you have on your desk, Ross?
It's an interesting expression. I didn't know what you were talking about. I said, well,
On the desk.
Keyboard, mouse. I finished a smoothie on this one. So I know what you mean now. A desk. What do I have on my desk? Well, I'm trying, I've sort of referred to this, that I am really reconstructing my life personally at this particular juncture for a number of reasons, and I'm making a film about that. It's very, very hard. But I think the thread that'll enable me to make a film that holds together is that About 8 years ago, I had a phone call from a Hollywood producer who wanted to take one of my old documentaries, Sherman's March, and turn it into a fiction film. And I gave him the rights to do that, the option rights. If he would let me make a documentary about him making the fiction film about the old documentary. And so that's now been through 6 chapters, I think, altogether. And it's still nowhere close to being made into a film. And I think what I'm interested in is the fact that this project is now almost 10 years old. It goes on, and yet the Ross character in Sherman's March presumably stays exactly the same age. And so the Ross who's making the documentary is looking back at the Ross who's in Sherman's March, and the distance gets further and further and further. I think in a way, it'll be a kind of meditation on mortality and a lot of other things. Another angle using the original Sherman's March, sorry, is that I filmed a number of scenes on battlegrounds, Confederate battlegrounds that have been maintained in the South. And in Sherman's March, which was made a long time ago, 1986 it was released, you can see these memorials to the American Civil War. And they seem not to be particularly well kept up, sort of ignored. They have a lot of weeds often. They're crumbling. You know, they're 100 years old at that point, so it's to be expected. And yet there are 5 or 6 of them in the film because I am tracing the route of a military campaign in Sherman's March. That campaign is called Sherman's March. And about 6 years ago, I got this idea after Hollywood called and wanted to try to make this into a fiction film. I should actually go back to those sites and film myself doing similar things that I did in the original film. And also, you know, and I assumed maybe the monuments wouldn't even be there because so much more time had gone by. But in fact, what I discovered was that they had been restored again, and beautifully restored. And over again, I kept saying the name of the same organization that was responsible for the restoration. And it was the organization was called Sons of Confederate Veterans. Confederacy was the Southern Army that fought against the North to maintain their way of life. And I thought, this is strange. Maybe there'll be a little film theme in here for me. And so I started meticulously filming all of these new plaques that appeared, the new Confederate flags that had been carefully etched into marble at these cemeteries, and thinking, I don't know what this means, but I'll just keep doing it. And really, literally one week while I was filming this exact thing happening, there was a very famous church massacre in Charleston, South Carolina, in which a white supremacist killed 9 African-American churchgoers. And he later posted a photograph of himself, or he already had a photograph of himself posted on Facebook holding a little Confederate flag. And of course, from that time on, everybody started thinking about the significance of the fact that these Confederate monuments were everywhere, including still flying above the Capitol building in Columbia, South Carolina. And suddenly my private investigation turned out to be a major international inquiry with tons of media, tragically, connected to this church slaughter. And I realized I wasn't going to be making the film I thought, or at least filming, the things that I had filmed were not going to be thought about in the same way. And of course, since then, we've had these very well-known police killings of Black people in the US, most recently George Floyd. And I know that was registered in France and other countries in Europe and around the world, really. It's a huge, huge phenomenon. And so, this is one of the situations you get into as a documentary filmmaker. These are obviously very important issues, and especially for someone who came from the South, who grew up in a segregated society, that I really have to think about what it means that my first film had all these Confederate monuments and emblems, and yet the film that I made didn't directly address any of that. It doesn't really direct the fact that slavery was at the heart of what held the South together economically and spiritually and everything back in the 19th century. So all of this suddenly becomes this very complex theme that you can make a film about in and of yourself. And I'm wrestling with that now. So that's another way in which I think the Sherman's March theme that I started working with 8 years ago actually has become something else altogether. And someone asked a question at some point about how do you know when you've got a film and you can conclude your filming. Well, here's a perfect example of, I can't stop filming now. There's too much going on. And so I'll continue to investigate this in various ways. I just want to make it clear, I don't plan to make a journalistic piece about this. I think so many people are doing this. And I think many of these people are minority, Black and African-American people who are making these films, and that's as it should be. So I can't do that. But actually, one of my students made a really terrific short film about the removal of the Confederate flag from the Capitol building. And he was African-American, and yet he doesn't reveal that in the course of the film until you've been into it about 3/4 of the way. And then someone mentions he's filming all of these people who are protesting, taking down the flag. And he gets into a kind of conversation. It's a conversation, it's not an argument. And the woman says, just because you're Black doesn't mean I don't like you. That's not what the Confederate flag is about. And at that point you realize, I knew, but I think an audience would realize, the filmmakers are African-American. And I think it's those kinds of films that are going to really carry the burden of pushing this theme forward. I can't make that film. My students could make that film. So that's an example of, and I don't know if in Romania there are things like this that people are struggling with. Certainly the Ceausescu regime is one thing to deal with, whether you feel that's been dealt with honestly in your history or not. I'm asking because I don't really know. And also whether that's something that filmmakers feel they can tackle in various ways. I know Irene Lustig has, in a certain way, dealt with that. I don't know if there are others, but I'd be curious to hear about that. I know in France, there's plenty of political filmmaking going on, and certainly around minorities wanting to assert their rights. I think some of the films are probably excellent, and some are very dogmatic and too political, perhaps, for my personal taste. But there's got to be room for all kinds of nonfiction documentary filmmaking, I think, including people who make self-centered films like me. That's a very long-winded answer to somebody's question, I think.
Yeah, it was very nice.
It's perfect.
I just wanted to say briefly that to reply to your question, that yes, there are a lot of films that deal with, I don't know if you specifically were thinking about the communist past when you gave the example of Ceausescu and the Irene Lustig reconstruction, but yes, there are a lot of films, also fictional and documentaries.
Sure.
One of the main themes, I think, of the past years.
Well, Romanian cinemas hugely popular in the United States in fiction, but I really haven't heard much about what's going on in documentary.
In documentary, yes, there is actually a very interesting documentary about Ceausescu, which is called Autobiography of Nicolae Ceausescu, made by Andrei Ujică. Maybe it was screened also in France and USA festivals. And there are a lot of other documentaries about it. Even my colleague Vanina has a film related to this, very personal film, Après le silence, French title. So yes, it's a very important topic. So we are waiting for you in Romania to meet the filmmakers in person. But before that, we can send you some links if you want to meet them before.
I have one filmmaker I want to ask you about, and I cannot remember his name. I was at something called the Sundance Documentary Laboratory, and he was the filmmaker who was there. Wait, I can get the notebook. I have his.
Okay. Maybe it was Acasă, Radu Ciorniciuc. I don't know.
Maybe because he was
probably, yeah.
Yes.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Maybe not, because he was with the film when it was already finished, done, I think, Radu.
Maybe he was there too before.
It's a work in progress then. I'm sure it's finished now. Let's see.
It's Acasă.
So I have to track it down. It's in here somewhere.
Do you know the topic? Is it you are not allowed to say, or you are?
Yes. No. He was making a film about two a Roma family.
Yes. So it's our opening film. It's called Acasă, Home. Yes, Acasă, Home, and the director is Radu Ciorniciuc.
It was a work in progress, so it didn't really have a title at that point, but maybe.
There was a Romanian documentary that was released in Sundance this year. It's about a Roma family that live in a park in a delta in Bucharest, Delta Văcărești, and they move. They are being moved from there to an apartment by the authorities.
This sounds possible.
And the name of the director is Radu Ciorniciuc. It's his first documentary.
Okay. Yes, his name is. Well, this person's name is Alexander Nanu. Nanu. Yes.
No.
Toto and his sisters. It's an older film. It's Toto and his sisters.
It was called Totonel at this point. Can you read this? Can you see this?
It was called
Totonel.
Yes, it's Toto and his sisters. Yes, it was released I think 4 years ago or 5 years ago. Yeah, you didn't watch the film?
No, I didn't see it because I lost track of him. I liked him very much and I liked his film.
Yeah.
But I wasn't the editor who was working with him. We were assigned to be working with different filmmakers. And so they screened it for us. We saw the version screened and then we talked about it afterwards one time and then I lost track, but it got finished.
We can put you in contact again. It's
easy. Okay. I have plenty of to be in contact.
Yes.
He actually made even a newer film than that.
I hope so. Yes.
Yes, in Venice last year. So
good for him. Good. I'm glad to hear that because I liked him and I liked his film project. And I hoped it was successful. That's good.
Yeah. So we are waiting for both of you to come to Bucharest personally, and we promise that we introduce you to all the filmmakers that you are interested in, if the case. If not, we stay between us. It was very nice to talk to you and to listen to you. It was more than I don't know, than a master class. It was more for what you.
It was a class with many masters.
Yes, with two. Well, thank you. And Vanina, do you want to add something?
No. I'm waiting for you in Bucharest. We just have to organize this now.
Okay. But you have to bring Claire too, or I won't come.
Yes, yes, yes. Claire, your wife, no problem. Tell us.
Good.
No, but yes, this is already settled that we bring you together.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will be able to travel if Claire agrees, of course.
Okay.
Yes, I'd
Yeah.
be glad. Okay.
Thank you very much. And I wish you good luck with the festival in August. I
you.
wish I could be there. I hope it's successful, and that I hope you don't have another second surge. You know, in America, we're having a new wave, but that's
No.
again because we're a very backward country. Unfortunately, we have terrible leadership. We've now been demoted to third world country, and so you have to be patient. But soon we'll be back in business, and you'll let us into your country again, I hope.
Yes, we hope to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good
Thank
night.
you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Claire.
Okay.
Thank you.
Je t'embrasse.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay. Au revoir.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.